Hey everyone, Dr. Hanisha here, and I know it's been so long since I've made a video, so I'm excited to be back, and I appreciate you all for being so patient with me as I process my birth story and really take that time to spend with my son. So I appreciate you all for doing that, but I am so excited to share my birth story with you all today. So before I get started, I kind of wanted to mention that this is something that I actually would like to share with my son in the future. And this is also why it took me so long, because I felt like this need for perfection. But it's also a reminder for myself and my son in the future that there's really no such thing as perfection, and just doing it is really most of the battle. So I appreciate y'all for being patient for me once again, but let's get into my birth story. All right, so started off, I was 39 weeks pregnant, Tuesday, December 28th. Actually that morning I went to a HIIT workout with my sister, and I was still feeling pretty good. I had almost no symptoms. Actually, one thing I should mention, and I'm going to backtrack a little bit, but I do want to apologize if I skip around a little bit, because I'm going to do my best to really go in chronological order, but you know, I might miss a piece or two and then come back to it. So with that said, coming back, I was feeling good throughout my entire pregnancy, almost no symptoms, maybe a little bit of back pain that would really be fixed or managed, I guess. It would be more managed when I would do some more intense core work. Like I would just get into a plank, or if I would just move around, sit on the yoga ball instead of sitting on the couch, those kinds of things would really support my back. So otherwise I felt really good. And then the only other symptom I started having kind of later on in my pregnancy was itchy hands and feet. So the palms of my hands and the soles of my feet, the bottoms of my feet were feeling really itchy. And that's actually a sign of cholestasis, which is essentially inflammation of the gallbladder, potentially a gallbladder infection. And this is pretty serious. And if a woman does have cholestasis, then she's considered higher risk, and we would need to transition to the hospital. Oh, again, backtracking. So I was planning on having a home birth. And so, so this was kind of a big deal for me. So because I was planning on having a home birth, I really wanted that. That was my birth plan. It was just something that I had always envisioned for myself. And when I heard that there might be the possibility that I need to be transferred to the hospital, I was like, okay, what can we do to confirm I don't have this? Because in my gut, I felt like, I was like, I don't think I actually have this. As a medical professional, I know the seriousness of it, but I didn't feel like it was something that I really had. So I really wanted to make sure that I got tested before making any decisions. And so on Wednesday morning, I was planning on getting my blood work done. And then Tuesday night, Tuesday, December 28th, in the middle of the night, Wednesday morning, probably like 3 or 4 a.m., December 29th, I started to have my first contraction. And with that contraction, I just noticed it. It really wasn't super painful. I was like, oh, this is different. I'm feeling something. And then I knew that I was about to start labor. But with my plan of having a home birth, I really didn't want to go into labor at this time, because I wanted to ensure that I could still have this home birth that I had always envisioned for myself. And so I was actually kind of hoping that it stalled out a little bit, waiting for my lab work to confirm that I do not have cholestasis. Because if we didn't get that lab work to confirm it, my midwife, being a good midwife, had told me that I would have to transfer to the hospital and have to deliver in the hospital at that point. And so I was really hoping that it would wait. And of course it did. Labor did get stalled a little bit. And that just kind of, to me, shows how energetically connected we are to our wombs, to our bodies. And so, so labor got stalled, and I ended up having contractions every hour or so, 29th up to the 30th. And at night on the 30th, I started to have more contractions, probably like every 5 to 10 minutes. I was feeling a little stressed. This was the 30th, and I already, because we did stat labs, so I actually already got my results in by the 30th, and the results, actually, I think I got them within that same day on the 29th, but I can't remember for sure, but it was around that time. So by the 30th, I already had my labs in that had confirmed I do not have cholestasis, so I could proceed with the home birth. And from there, the 30th was when my contractions started to pick up. I was having them every 5 to 10 minutes or 5 to 15 minutes or so. And that was when I called my midwife, because I was like, I think I'm gonna have this baby tonight. And she came by and she was like, you still got so much time, just relax. Don't do anything, watch some TV, just chill out, meditate, take some baths. So I'm doing all these things, and my water hadn't broke at this time. So Epsom salt baths were still okay. But I think she was saying to try to minimize the amount of Epsom salt at that point. But my water hadn't broke. Just do the things to help induce labor a little bit more. So that would be things like squats and moving around on the yoga ball, laughing. So I was watching a lot of stand-up comedy and Disney movies, and I would engage in, I think I was trying to do some like housework, but because I was having the contractions every like 5 to 15 minutes, I was like stopping and being like, okay, I gotta breathe through this. And trying to remember my hypnobirthing exercises every time. So I kind of just ended up chilling out, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna rest, I'm gonna sleep. I tried to do that as much as I could, but having the contractions every 5 to 15 minutes was quite frequent at that point. But it still wasn't at the point where I would be in active labor, which usually occurs when you're having contractions between 3 to 5 minutes, or 2 to 5 minutes. And I wasn't there yet. And so on the night of the 31st, so my midwife had left the morning of the 31st, and then on the day of the 31st, continued with the same pattern. Like I said, watched a lot of stand-up comedy, because I've read how laughing can actually kind of help induce those, what's the muscle? The ejection muscles. So it helps the fetal ejection reflex, essentially. So it can kind of help like push out the baby. And so I was trying to engage in that a little bit more, but honestly, at that point, even the stand-ups weren't as funny. So it was definitely a really interesting journey where I really got to practice mindfulness and meditation and my breath work, and really got to test my mental game. And that is something that I feel like I've been practicing for many years, and I take pride in my mental strength. And so I kept going with it, right? And then the 31st came, my partner Noah was with me the entire time. So he was also not sleeping as much. Every time I'd have a contraction, I would like wake him up and breathe through it with him. And then my doula, Haley, who's also the administrative assistant for Mahan Health, and she came over on the 31st because we thought, okay, maybe we could use a little support. Also, my partner Noah is a huge University of Michigan fan, and they were in the playoffs, and that game was on the 31st. And normally I would be like, you're not watching this shit right now. But it had already been 3 days, and I didn't think the baby was coming anytime soon at that point. Or at least I felt like it might be a little bit longer than I had anticipated. So I was like, it's okay. And plus Michigan is never in the playoffs. I was throwing a little bit of shade at Michigan because I am an Ohio State fan, and I went to the Ohio State. So throw a little shade there, but it doesn't happen that often. So I was like, all right, you can have this. And Haley was there supporting me for those a little bit more for those 3 hours, but both of them had kind of been going back and forth, sleeping as much as they could, because as a supportive role, you're so engaged. So just like I said, Noah didn't really get to sleep much. So when Haley was there, he could finally sleep for a few hours, and then Haley would sleep for a few hours, and then Noah would kind of take over. It would just be this constant back and forth. And then of course during that whole time, I'm not sleeping really at all. And so the 31st, in the middle of the night. So, we rang in the new year together. We had, I had like a sip of champagne because I was like, well, at this point, it doesn't matter. But I had a sip of champagne just to ring in the new year. And it was the three of us, Noah, Haley, and myself, watching Miley Cyrus and Pete Davidson ring in the new year. And we were like, all right, well, he's got to be a New Year's baby. He's here. He didn't come in 2021. He wasn't a New Year's Eve baby. He's got to be a New Year's Eve baby, or New Year's Day baby. And so we're anticipating this now. I'm in the water a little bit more now. I'm starting to have contractions. By even the 31st at night, I started to have contractions probably every 5 to 10 minutes, every 3 to 10 minutes even. And then I started to have them a little bit more frequently. It would be, about every 3 to 10 minutes, just consistently. And then I continued to have that all throughout the January 1st. I continued to have that. And then, we called over the midwife on January 1st in the evening. We were like, I think that this is happening soon. It's, I'm having contractions. It seemed like every 3 to 7 minutes at that point. And so we're like, it's happening frequently. I think it's coming. And so we called the midwife over, and she was there kind of supporting, checking in on everything, my vitals, all of that. Everything was looking normal, but I was exhausted. It had already been 4 days since I'd been in labor and hadn't really slept, at least for 2 days. And I was exhausted. So I was falling asleep between every contraction. I was falling asleep between every 3 to 7 minutes that I had a contraction. I would fall asleep in the tub, and then I would get up and have this contraction and have to like remind myself to breathe through it and support my mind and remember my hypnobirthing exercises, all of these things while I'm going through this process. And my partner, Noah, and Haley were amazing, just reminding me to kind of go through that, reminding me how amazing I am. I'm definitely a person who needs words of affirmation, so I appreciated all of that so much. And so I kept going. But then there was a point around January 2nd in the morning. So now this is the middle of the night, January 2nd in the morning. At that point, still having contractions every 3 to 7 minutes. And I'm like, is he coming yet? I'm feeling so anxious. I'm like, he has to be coming soon. I was like, can you please check how far dilated I am? Because he's got to be coming soon. My water still hadn't broken. And she checks and I'm only 6 centimeters dilated. This is after almost 5 days of labor. And I'm like, oh my God, he's still not here. And I'm like, okay, this is driving me crazy. I'm starting to feel more anxious. My mental game is being challenged even more and more. And so then finally at this point, my midwife is like, you don't have the energy to push out a baby right now. So either you can sleep, if you're able to fall asleep, sleep and then wake up and we can get this baby out. You can push the baby out. And if you're not able to fall asleep, it's probably best to go to the hospital, get some pain meds, take a nap, and then push out the baby. I chose the latter option because I knew at this point I was not able to fall asleep anymore. I could not fall asleep. So we end up going to the hospital the morning of January 2nd. We get there around 9 o'clock. By 9:30, the epidural is inside of me, and then I'm a whole new person. I went from this labor land of just like constant like contractions and being in pain every 3 to 7 minutes to just having zero pain. And on my way to the hospital, I even actually, with the motion in the car, I got a little nauseous and I ended up vomiting in the car. And it was just feeling so terrible. I couldn't sit. Every position in the car felt super uncomfortable. I wanted to be on all fours, which is what felt most comfortable to me. And I couldn't in the car. I kind of was doing it anyway, but it was so difficult. But anyway, we get to the hospital and I'm finally, I'm finally myself again, really. I have all this energy to just breathe and be myself. And what happens is, because I got the epidural, my heart rate my blood pressure goes down and the baby's heart rate goes down. So the doctors are naturally concerned. They suggest some medication, but as I am a naturopathic doctor, as I am pretty knowledgeable in this area, I knew how the cascade of medical interventions occurred, and I really didn't want that. So I was like, let's wait 15 to 20 minutes, see if things normalize, because I just had a huge shift on my body. So with that huge shift, of course, there's going to be changes, and on me and the baby. It just makes sense. I went from like this constant pain every 3 to 7 minutes to being at a point where I had zero pain and my entire musculoskeletal system had just relaxed. My nervous system had just relaxed significantly. So there's going to be some side effects of that. And so I asked them to wait 15 to 20 minutes. Of course, everything had normalized within 15 to 20 minutes. And so this is also just kind of like a side note. Ask your doctors to wait a little bit. Like, it's okay. If things continue at that point, then yeah, sure, the medication might be indicated, but if it doesn't, then it might not be needed. And so everything normalized, and I ended up taking a nap after that. Finally took a nap for about 3 or 4 hours, and I woke up and still had a decent amount of energy, but my water had still not broken, and my contractions had actually slowed down, which can happen with an epidural. So, and I, again, was aware of this, my contraction. And so she checked how far dilated I was, and I was still only 7 centimeters dilated. And this is in the afternoon on January 2nd. And so I'm only 7 centimeters dilated. And what they recommend is either they break my water, so an amniotomy, or induce me with Pitocin to help induce the contractions a little bit more. And again, I really don't want extra medical intervention, so I had suggested a more natural option I had requested a more natural option, and I honestly had forgotten about this in the moment, but the nurse had recommended nipple stimulation. And so we hooked me up to a pump and started pumping my breasts, and that had actually induced more of the contractions. So did not need to use any medication or break my water. And then when the doctor came to check again, my water ended up breaking at that point too. So this was a good sign. Things had started to progress. And again, just shows how that maybe that medical intervention may not always be necessary. And so at this point I had, now I was about 8 centimeters dilated. So things were moving, and I was like, okay, cool. Things are moving. And, oh, excuse me. And finally, I'm at a place where I think that he's coming soon. And I'm like, oh, he's going to be born on January 2nd. And so I'm like, all right, the 2nd, that's his birthday. And finally, I get to a point where I feel like I need to pass a bowel movement. I'm like, oh my God, I have to poop right now. And it's so intense and so painful. So I was taking the lowest dose of the epidural. And so I could feel everything at this point. A lot of it wears off as well. And so usually they recommend increasing the dose. And I didn't do that. And so at this point, I could pretty much feel everything. Usually they say within 24 hours it wears off. I got it at, well, not 24. I think it's like 12 to 24 hours. It starts to like slow down, usually up the dose. And then, but I thought he was coming soon. So I was like, it's okay. We don't need to up the dose or anything. And at this point I could pretty much feel everything. And I'm like, oh my God, I really need to poop. And I was convinced that I was extremely constipated and needed an enema. I was like, okay, he doesn't have space to get out because I'm probably backed up. I don't know what, like, it feels like I'm so backed up, and like, it was such a fascinating feeling. And they were like, you don't need an enema, and it looks like your baby's ready to come out. That's really what is happening. And I'm like, no, I need an enema. And I'm going through this, like, and everyone's just reassuring me that it's okay, because the doctor also checked if my bowels were obstructing, and she said they're not. And clearly I was a little in my head at that point. And so finally we're like, okay, let's start kind of the active pushing. But this was around, so now this is around 11 p.m. But at this point, this is 11 p.m. on January 2nd, and at this point, I end up getting a fever and the baby's heart rate goes up. And that had been honestly occurring for at least 30 minutes, potentially already an hour or so, where his heart rate was elevated. And so they had recommended antibiotics because they thought I might have an infection. I think it's chorioamniocentesis. I forget exactly the infection that they thought I had. Either way, they thought I had an infection, so they wanted to give me antibiotics. And I was like, oh, he's got to be coming soon. Let's wait a little bit. I thought I would be able to push him out before taking the antibiotics, because I didn't want to ruin his gut microbiome. Like, this is where my mind is. I don't want to affect his gut microbiome. And this is like the first, his first welcoming, his first step into the world. And I really didn't want antibiotics to be a part of that journey for him. And so I was like, let's wait. We waited about an hour and my fever was still there and his heart rate was still high. And so at this point, I was okay with taking the antibiotics. I did take the antibiotics, and after, it was actually confirmed that I had group B strep. So I'm glad I did end up taking the antibiotics, as that can be fairly risky and detrimental if not treated for the baby. And so I got the 1 dose of the antibiotics, and that took about 4 hours to get the full dose. Within that time, I was actively pushing the entire time. So it was about 4.5 hours of active pushing from 11:30 p.m. until 4:17 a.m. when he was finally born. And I was actively pushing, practicing my surge breathing. This is actually really important because my OB told me that I had probably some of the strongest pelvic floor muscles that she's ever seen. And my breath was exactly the way we needed it to be able to support the baby to come out without any tearing. And I ended up having one super minor first-degree tear. It was really, really minor, and she said that was the one muscle that was already a little tight, or the ligament that was already a little tight from the beginning. And so this is where that pelvic floor work is super, super important. And so I was able to finally push him out about 4.5 hours after I started. And what was amazing is they allowed me to have a mirror in there, and it was a long size mirror. So I was able to watch myself give birth to my child. And it was the most amazing thing, because at first I saw his head and saw all the hair, and I was like, oh my God, he has so much hair. I'm so excited. Which, of course, if you see me, I have a lot of hair. My partner has a lot of hair. So really makes sense. We were both born with a lot of hair, but it was just so exciting to me. And then I got to feel his little head. And then I was watching the entire process, which really helped keep me motivated, even though I was feeling so exhausted again. By the end of that, at that point, I was like, okay, I just got to do this. Again, that mental game. Noah stepped up more than I could have ever imagined. I knew he would be so great and so supportive, but I didn't even know he could be this amazing. So I'm so grateful for him. And then of course, Haley was there, my doula, and just extremely supportive the entire time. Even whenever we're talking about all the medical interventions, she was there supporting me in my every decision. She had my birth plan, and was willing to advocate for me as well. So I appreciate that. Noah did too, but Haley, of course, knows a little bit more of this field. So this is why having a doula is extremely important, because our partners may be as supportive as possible, but they don't know the medical field like a doula might know. So it's really helpful to have that support there, especially when you're in a place where maybe you can't make that decision for yourself. And so I'm looking at myself pushing out this baby. And then finally at 4:17 a.m., his whole little body comes out. They put him directly on my chest, and he is so amazing. He has these wide, big brown white eyes, and he looks straight at me, and we're both just making eye contact. And it was crazy because we're in a hospital setting at this point, and there's doctors all over the place. They're aspirating him. They're checking my vitals. They're checking his vitals. They're doing all these things. And even though they were doing all that, at least for 5 minutes, maybe even longer, it felt like the only people there were me, Noah, and our baby boy, Zaire Ishan Patel Key, as his full name. It felt like there were only 3 of us there. Everything else had just stopped. It was like, even though all this was going on, it really just felt like this is it. It was just us. And, but then of course that went away shortly after because, Zaire's temperature was a little low. So the doctors were concerned, but I was like, you cannot take him away from me. I'm spending my golden hour with him, and that's it. I was like, you can warm him up, do whatever you want while he's on me, but you're not taking him away from me. I was very particular about that. I did not let them take off the vernix. He didn't have much, but I made sure that they didn't take off the vernix. And likely because of the antibiotics, he ended up passing a bowel movement like right away. He had that meconium as soon as he came out. It was like all over me. It was really not a pretty sight. But birth isn't always super like, I don't know, it's not like filtered and picture perfect like that. That's a part of it. And that's what makes it so beautiful. It's so real and raw and natural. And I love it. It was so cool. And so yeah, it's, we spent that golden hour together, and then, with skin to skin contact. And then short after that hour was over, almost immediately, they took him to the warmer because his temperature was still low. And at that point, Noah ended up spending however much time with him there. He was and the warmer was in the room, so they didn't take him away. I could still see him. But of course, I had just given birth, so they're, adjusting everything. I can barely move. And so I could still see him, but Noah sat with him and spent that time with him and while he was in the warmer. And then after that, everything had normalized. Thankfully, he had no infections or anything like that. We were very grateful. And then Noah spent that time with him after that and got that skin to skin contact. And it was absolutely beautiful. And so that was our whole experience. That was my birth story. And that was the birth story of Zaire Ishan. I'm so excited that I'm finally sharing this. And let me give a little bit of the postpartum part so that you all have a little bit of that as well. So I didn't want to stay at the hospital long. I don't have health insurance, so I was partially afraid of spending too much money. But at the same time, I have a pretty good abundance mindset, and I was like, whatever we need to do to make sure that we are both healthy is really all that matters in the end. But I didn't want to spend more time in a room there than I needed to. So he was born at 4:17 a.m. Noah, Zaire, and I took a little nap. And by 2 p.m., we had actually left the hospital. This is also actually something you could ask to do. It kind of depends. At this point, I could really barely walk, so it was really difficult. So it really makes sense that they keep you in the hospital for 2 days. But so if that's something that you can do, you have health insurance, it's probably best to do that. But I really just wanted to be home. I was planning on having a home birth and just being at home after, and that was really what I wanted. And so we got home by 2 p.m. on January 3rd. And like I said, he was born 4:17 a.m. on January 3rd. So within 10 hours after he was born, we were already home. And I was having a little bit of pain and of course bleeding I was having bleeding for the next 5 weeks, but a little bit a little bit stronger flow, or the locha that comes out. I think that's how you pronounce it. Honestly, that's how I've always pronounced it. But that locha blood that women have postpartum, it was a little bit heavier for probably the first 2 weeks, really more so the first week, and then it started to get a little lighter, and I was having pain in that area for probably about the first week, and then really had subsided at that point. I did not take any ibuprofen. All I did was arnica, 1M and 200C just constantly. Well, I did arnica 1M constantly, and then I did 200C before, while I was in labor. And so I think that was a part of what supported me and throughout the birth and labor and postpartum. And so that was kind of my journey. That was really the main things. By 5 weeks, I was feeling pretty much back to myself, no more bleeding. The only symptom that I have continued to randomly have is stress incontinence. And so I am working on my pelvic floor and kind of coming back to my pelvic floor strength after giving birth, after going through all of that. And so yeah, the only symptom that I've had, probably, my baby's 14 weeks now. I'm 14 weeks postpartum, and I've had stress incontinence probably 4 or 5 times. And I do notice that it is worse with after sex. I'm more likely to have it after sex or after I run. And so I'm just being mindful of running, and also after I do really stretchy yoga classes. So I have been making sure to do more strength focused yoga classes, and also making sure to engage my pelvic floor as I do all of these activities. So whether that's running, doing yoga, or having sex, I'm trying to make sure that I'm constantly engaging my pelvic floor. So and then doing my pelvic floor exercises recommended by my PT to help reduce that stress incontinence or completely stop it in general. So hopefully it doesn't keep happening. But that is my story, and that is the birth story of Zaire Shan. I am so grateful that you all stuck around to listen to this entire story, because I know this was much longer than I had expected. But I'm grateful for you all for being here, being a part of my journey, and listening to my story. This is something that, yeah, I ended up being in labor for 6 days and was pushing for 4.5 hours. And I would not have changed it for the world. I think in hindsight, I feel like I could have probably chilled out a little bit more before going into labor, meaning doing less work. I feel like I was really trying to get everything together in terms of the nursery. I was trying to get my practice together as I was about to take leave. So I was really super busy right before. And if I would change anything, it would be to just relax and do nothing before, so that I wouldn't have, I don't know what would have happened at that point, but I feel like that was a part of what led to me reaching what is called maternal exhaustion, where I didn't have the energy to push out the baby. So that is one thing that I would change, is just relax for starting at like 36 weeks, just chill the hell out. Just do nothing, no chores, no work, nothing, just meditate, take baths, enjoy my life. And do, like, working out was okay. I think that would be fine. Doing the yoga and even like strength training and all that, I think that's fine to do, but just not this extra work that was stressing me out. So that is one thing that I would change, but otherwise, it is really funny how it works after labor. Women have this tendency to, I think what happens is we actually forget how painful this is and what we were actually going through. And because right after I was like, that wasn't bad. And my partner Noah was like, oh, really? That seemed pretty intense. But you know, I don't know. I really don't think it was that bad. And I'm really proud of myself for doing this and going through that entire journey. And I'm so happy and in love with my son. He's the most wonderful, cutest, sweetest, just like funnest little human being ever, and I wouldn't change anything for the world. So I'm so grateful for his health and my health, and that we're all here, and I'm able to share this story with you. So thank you all again for listening, and I will see you all next time. Wishing you all Mahan health and peace as always. All right, deuces.